Hello, everybody. At least hopefully you can see and hear me. I didn't really fix this camera since there's too many things, so we won't use that view much. I see Quindy's in the chat room, so presumably that means she can see and hear me. I will switch over to the other view and turn on more lights. Hey, Motor City Ray, thank you for the subscription. 42 months, wow. That is a long time. We appreciate the loyalty. All right, so last week we were looking at, I was layering metallics up from a matte dark base. I used different colors just so we kind of had the opportunity to compare and contrast. This guy isn't quite finished. That's why he's still on the holder, and I might work on him today while other things are drying. So he had like a blue-black foundation. So there's just like a little touch of blue in there. He had just a straight black foundation. So this is kind of like the neutral version. And then this one I used like a black-brown. So I used the same steel colors on all of them, but started with a different matte color foundation as a way of layering up to do shaded metallics instead of adding the shading with matte paint later. So if you'd like to see more about that, that was last episode and the one before, and I think Quindy will put a link into Reaper's YouTube channel where everything's archived. The last episode's still on Twitch, of course. So I'll just put those aside for now. I was debating what to do today, and then I remembered what I got to do last week, which was go to the Dungeons and Dragons movie. So a friend of mine, actually several friends of mine, there are several nerds at Regal Theater, support Regal Theater, it's full of nerds. Where I live in Knoxville is where their headquarters are. So they got an opportunity to get free passes, and he took us to see, took some friends along, my husband and myself, to see the movie. So I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything. I will share my opinions, and I don't think it's a spoiler because it's in previews and ads and stuff. But there is an owlbear, in fact. So what this is a diceling. I could construct this with the aid of 6 or 7 steps into a dragon, but it starts off looking like a D20. But they also did an owlbear. So this is kind of the owlbear from the movie. Some of the dicelings are from the movie and some of them are not. They're just D&D things. So you can still see the numbers and stuff. And I cannot do the transform. This was like the hardest one to put together, I think. So I will not be transforming and reforming him because that would be pretty much the whole stream, probably. And I'd likely swear, which I believe is allowed. He doesn't have any nipples, so he's cool. He makes me think of like he goes to the gym. This is very pumped up. He's gonna pump you up, owlbear. So I thought, why not paint an owlbear? Since I do have a few. I'm trying to get him to stand up. All right. Put him back in our display thing later. I seem to have put chat in such a way that I cannot easily see it. So I have this owlbear and this owlbear, and I believe both of these were sculpted by Jason. I think that Julie Guthrie's owlbear would fit the way the movie chose to make the owlbear look, but I do not have that one. So this one is more of like a horned owl type of look, although it would probably be easier to paint and easier for you to see. This one fits the character a little more, and he has like these amazing googly eyes that I think will be fun to paint if I get to that part. So I will paint this one. But let's look at some inspiration first. There's no spoilers. There's only one movie related thing here, and it's like a poster with concept art. It's not actually from the movie. So this is the concept art of the owlbear, and then the actual owlbear, I think, like Jason's, actually is a little more fur than feathers, but it does still have some of these markings that are like the snowy owl markings. But this is going to be an interesting challenge because on the snowy owl, if we look at some real snowy owls, first of all, we're going to see that there is a range in how many markings they have and how dark or light the markings are. But if you look closer, it seems like they're at the tips of the feathers, which is, first of all, an interesting challenge because we're used to making recesses darker, and this is making something that's protruding darker. But then the other thing they'll make a challenge is most of where the markings are, this figure has fur, not feathers. So it's going to be kind of more like tabby stripes in a way, I think. So then this owlbear, or this actual owl, this snowy owl is an owl, not an owlbear, has very light and not very many markings, but they got these great eyes. I have to say, it's going to be very visually effective to have like the bright yellow eyes rimmed with black. That's definitely going to make a good focal point. Where this owl is almost half and half, black and white. And you can see even better that it is the tips of the feathers here. So, how do I take that knowledge and try to make this? So if you remember, actually, I'm in the wrong folder. So you briefly saw something from the movie there that I got off the internet. It's not like I took that picture in the internet, like in the movie theater. I was working on white and different kinds of white shading several episodes ago. So we have these characters. I did this one with more of, an icy blue type of shadow, and this one was like a warmer pinky white because I had some photos of snowmen and snow sculptures that displayed both ranges of colors as well as slightly more neutral colors. And I did a little bit of fur here. This is like the warmer fur, and this is the cooler fur. But that wasn't a lot of fur to work with. So we have more fur to work with now. And we can look at some of the... I think I got all these photos from Unsplash. So these are photos that, if I could look at them, actual file names on my computer, I could give you the credits for, and they are posted with the permission to use them for things like this. So this is like more of the warm, dirty gray type of shade color, and there's even a bit more brown up in the ears. Then this is, a little bit cooler, a little bit more neutral gray. Part of that's the lighting of the photo, but we can use photo lighting for inspiration as well. And of course, I think a lot of us have seen polar bears that have kind of yellowy tan. This is like the most yellowy tan fur that I've ever seen on a polar bear. Is one of the reasons I picked this photo, and then also because could he be more adorable? And I'm going to assume that if the owl half of the white owl bear is snowy owl, then the bear half is probably polar bear. These are some polar bears that they also had, some gray markings and a much softer yellow in the shadow areas. So I think I'm going to go for more something like this than the extremely yellow. And then these ones are actually, it's a warm gray, but they're a gray. There's not really any yellow there at all, which again could be part of the lighting or, editing on the photo, but was interesting. This one also doesn't seem to have a lot of yellow. And then these guys are a little more on the warm side again. And then this is a Arctic fox or something, one presumes. So taking that information and my various inspirations and stuff, what do I want to do? So I want to have something that's part snowy owl and part polar bear. So I'm going to have either like slate gray or charcoal gray or black markings, and then an overall white fur. Tyler Hansen says polar bears are way too cute for being the apex predators that will wreck your day. Yes, do not try to hug the polar bears, despite the cute pleading. They really don't want the hugs. They want the fish. So what my thinking was is if I do kind of the white parts with warm shadows, kind of like the polar bear fur, and then use, not quite as warm, like a charcoal slate. I got this mountain stone. I think that's a good foundation for the markings. Might have to darken it up a little. That will sort of capture both things and keep the fur markings distinct from the stuff that is shading the forms and shapes of the creature. This is my thinking. Will it work? Who knows? The other reason I was tempted to do this guy is then one day I could paint another color scheme and we could compare, but I also could just get another one of these owl bears and one day paint another color scheme and compare. So I'm not going to start with pure white. though I often will when painting white things. I mean, this bleached linen is not like radically different from white, but it is warm. It kind of fits in with my idea of doing a warm white. But then I guess the question is, I have to think about what do I want to use for the shadows. So probably some of the gray, but there'll be a little bit of brown or tan or something in there to make the warm color. So I'm using the paints that come either with the Learn to Paint kits or the expansions to the Learn to Paint kits, just on the assumption that some people who watch something called Beyond the Kit might have some of those kits, and like I'm all set up and stuff. So this is like a very warm orangey brown. To me, especially since we're talking about a thing that's going to be pretty much all neutral or very desaturated colors, this is going to start looking bright. It's going to look it's not going to look like a super saturated orange in context, but it is going to look more saturated than it looks here. And I'm talking about putting this in shadows. We want shadows to recede. I don't want the shadow areas to be drawing attention. So I don't think that's a good choice. This woodland brown, which I would normally consider, like it's a slightly yellowy orangey brown, and it's fairly subdued for a brown. You compare it to this harvest brown, you can see that it's got a little less color in it and more brownness in it. But again, in the context of working in black and white and gray, it's still, I think, going to be a little much. This is fairly neutral as far as, a brown goes, but I think it's a little light in color. This, I think, is going to be an interesting choice. So it's a little bit green, a little bit yellow, but I think once I mix it in with some of the other things, it's going to be, it's going to have enough of that warmth to do what I want to do there, but stay kind of subdued enough to not draw too much attention into my shadow areas. And I wanted to get some of that set up because although I'll probably do a wash, I want to try to do some, establishing my shadow and light areas while I'm putting the paint on. So let's start mixing some of this brown color in and see what it looks like. I shook the paints off camera on my shaker, so shake more than you see me doing. There's a lot of owl. We're going to need a bit of paint. So if I start mixing in some of this, what do I get? So that is a warm tan. It's not very dark. I think we're going to need some of this gray as well. Quindy has posted a link to the paint kit information. It'll have if you weren't aware that there were expansion paint sets, they do have they have examples of how you can use them for shading and highlighting and stuff of the other colors, either in their own kit or in the main paint kits. But they're mainly, like, if you have core skills, you don't have a red, you don't have a skin color. If you have the other one, if you have layer up, you don't have green, I think. You don't have a green. So the idea behind the expansion kits is if you really were starting or you have a friend that's starting and you want to recommend them to your friend, it gives you, more of the colors so that you can start painting a variety of things straight away. I don't know how dark the shadows we're going to need. White can be very deceiving, where sometimes you need to go darker than you think. Sometimes you need to go lighter than you think. So I'll start here and see what happens, I guess. And the expansion kits only came out pretty recently. I mean, like, it's probably been a year or something because my version of recent is, anything happened between now and 5 years ago, but it's more recent than 5 years ago, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to want a lot of the face on the actual owls. The face seems mostly white. They don't seem to have the black feather markings. Plus, that'll make the, dark line around the eyes really dramatic with that bright yellow. Iris. Sorry, I was forgetting the parts of the eye for a minute there, and it was bugging me, so of course my brain just froze and I went silent. It is also, I mean, this isn't like super challenging painting, but I do have to think a little bit. I did not take any mold lines off this guy, and now I'm wondering if I should have done that. So if anyone has non-spoilery questions or comments about the D&D movie, I encourage you to bring those up in the comments. I liked it. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like the best movie I ever saw, but you know, it's a solid 7.5. I had a lot of fun. There's a lot of neat visuals. If you're familiar with Forgotten Realms, you will see places that you recognize. And they don't always, explain everything on screen. So some of the stuff is kind of, I mean, I don't know if I'd call it Easter eggs, but some of the stuff are little nods and things that are specifically for fans. But overall, they explain everything that you need to know. So if you have a friend or family member who's like not into D&D, but you might like to ask them to go to the movie with you, it is, in my belief, which, obviously it's a little hard for me to say since I am familiar with D&D, but my belief is that they explain everything that you need to know to understand what's happening in the story and who's who and what's what and what's going on. And then there's just a lot of extra stuff. And I'm pretty sure that I didn't get stuff because I think the Forgotten Realms has kind of like a living storyline, or it used to. I don't know if it's active right now, but they did that for a long time where events would transpire. And I'm pretty sure there was at least a shot or two that was referring to those things that I didn't get because like I had the original box set and I kind of know the world, but I don't, I haven't followed all the story stuff. Our current game is, well, we started there. Now we're in the big dungeon underneath. So we haven't, because of stuff that our GM did in our game, we haven't been able to make it back to Forgotten Realms for some time. So I'm certainly not learning any more about it right now. All right, and I said I was going to, do a first pass on the shading, and I haven't really been doing that. Let's get some of that in. Everything, and I'm just going to do kind of like overall light from above. Maybe I'll make it slightly to one side since he's, got a pose where one side of his face is facing up, so kind of accenting that with the light direction would not be a terrible plan. I'm not gonna do any shading on the face with this giant brush. I will wait. There are certainly lots of familiar creatures and whatnot in the movie. Would a non-gamer spouse be mildly entertained? Yes, I think they absolutely would be fine with it. Now, I don't have children, so take anything I say about is it appropriate for children with a grain of salt. But we were actually even kind of surprised that it had PG-13 instead of just PG. There's a little bit of swearing, but there's like pretty much zero sexual content. There's not even much romantic content, so there's no problem on that front. And I would say, obviously there's fighting because if you have a D&D, I mean, everybody's game is different. Some of us do have games where there's not always violence, but it would be a strange choice for a movie to make. And so there's certainly, sword fighting, fisticuffs, things of this nature. But I feel like they did it in such a way that it's abstract. Like, you're not seeing the consequences of the violence in a very graphic manner. It's like there's not like gouts of blood. And our one friend, the friend who took us, does have kids, and he was concerned. I don't know what age his girls are. I want to say like 7 and 11, somewhere around there. He was concerned that there were some jump scares that might make it a little too much for them. But that's kind of, you got to know your kid territory. And as far as grossness goes, if you've watched the trailer with the 5 questions scene, if whoever doesn't like grossness can handle the 5 question scene, then there's nothing worse than that, I don't think. So just getting some of the initial shading in to, because this is kind of the challenge when painting white or black, is you want a lot of the surface area has to be, white or black. But you still have to show the shapes. I mean, that's what we're doing with shading and highlighting and stuff. We're showing what the shapes of things are, and you still have to do that. Just because it's a white object doesn't mean it's not going to have any shadows. It just means that the midtone and the highlight are essentially both the same color. If it was blue, it's like the midtone would be a middle blue and the highlight would be a light blue, and here it's going to be white and white. I like the quippy humor style in the movie, which, again, if you've seen any of the trailers, you know what to expect there. I know that's not everybody's D&D game or everybody's preference for fantasy, but it's definitely, like, if you were talking to someone who's not super into fantasy, I've seen a lot of comparisons to Guardians of the Galaxy, and I don't think that's completely fair, but describing it as, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones meets Guardians of the Galaxy is not, for an elevator pitch way of saying it, that's pretty good summation. So definitely don't expect like dark, gritty type of, I mean, there's some gritty, but they're not going for the, Game of Thrones, everything is real and everything sucks kind of vibe. Or even the Lord of the Rings, it's all very stately and serious except for these little hobbits vibe. I enjoyed most of the special effects. There were some neat scenes, not just the critters. But, I mean, there's a dragon in it that he's like my cat, and I love him so much. I joke that Corbin and Timber Toad, are brothers from another mother. But if anyone listening in the comments has seen the original D&D movie that I believe my husband looked up and came out 23 years ago with Jeremy Irons and Thora Birch and some other people who probably were really questioning their career choices at that time. So I actually went to that in the theater with my the guy who was my game master at the time. Like, we sat down in the theater and the movie started and we were like, oh no. Like, it was like we just had to go with it's so bad we're gonna laugh instead of cry. I found Jeremy Irons in particular hilarious because this guy had won an Oscar at the time of this performance, if I recall correctly. And this is kind of when I'm like, oh, that's what a director does. I get it a little more now. A director stops this from happening. A director stops Jeremy Irons from ripping up the scenery, then nailing it back together so we can rip it up again. It was just like, wow, you were having too much fun, and this guy should be stopping you, and he's not. And supposedly, the guy who was like the director or creator, whatever, was like a huge fan, and this may be an argument for not always letting people who are the biggest fans of a thing do the thing, because he did not. I didn't think about it, but I don't know if you're familiar with Ginny D on YouTube. She did a review of the old movie. She talks a little bit about the new movie because she also saw it early with her game group. But she said it doesn't even capture the spirit of D&D very well, in that there's kind of a main protagonist, which means it's not a group, it's not an ensemble, it's not a party. there's one guy, and there are some things only that guy gets to do, which does not really reflect the concept of D&D being, you know, a party ensemble type of thing. And I felt that was an excellent point. Like, regardless of what your D&D game is like. Now, I mean, it is certainly possible to play D&D with, like, a GM and one player. And if that's the option you have or what you prefer, I mean, that is 100% valid. But it's not, I think, kind of the primary way that the game is played and that people enjoy it and that you should be kind of representing in a movie. That is how I would put that, I guess. So yeah, big things like this, when you start wet blending it, you go through some paint. So I'm having to mix more of my shadows. I'm probably gonna have to mix more of that one too. But I'm not getting too fussed about whether I've done it exactly. Like, if I haven't, well, animals have variation over parts of their body. People do too, really. So just gonna, you know, make sure I got the value pretty much there. And I think this is a little more brown, but, you know, maybe it's more brown on his legs. And if I don't get this exactly right where I'm putting all the shadows and whatnot, I can come back later and refine and fix it. This is just a way of getting a lot of information down in a short amount of time. Well, short-ish. Then all this paint's gonna have to dry, which will take a minute, and I will do my backup tasks. Work on the ogre, or actually what I think I want to do is I had to do a quick swatch on the one brown when I wanted to give you my examples using the browns that are in the Learn to Paint kit sets, because I never did my swatch thing on the expansion paints. So I think that since I think it's important for me to be able to do comparisons like that, that I need to swatch them while this paint is drying. If you're not familiar with wet blending and you've ever wanted to try it for things like this, that where there's a lot of texture, are excellent to practice on, because if you don't get a perfect smooth blend, the fur is going to break it up and people aren't going to see it anyway. So this guy is like the exact perfect thing to practice wet blending on. Wow, I should have mixed even more paint because I am definitely not running out of owlbear at this point. Got plenty of owlbear left to paint. Now let's get some dark under that pokey grabby claw and in his hand there. The claws are black in the concept art, so I will go with black for that. The claws and the beak, which I think matches the real snowy owl. Speaking of terrible movies, they made a not terrible D&D movie. Maybe this Mario movie will be not terrible. Geltip asks, are these a triad, or am I just choosing 3 colors to wet blend with? Wet blending is something I need to practice more. This is not a triad. There aren't really, I don't think there are any triads in the Learn to Paint kit, and kind of when I default to what paints am I going to use if I haven't, you know, picked out a very specific set, I use those. Certainly you could use a triad. I like to customize a bit and also give people an opportunity to see mixing and that it's not scary like this. So this mountain stone, let's see if I have, well, I have a neutral gray, but it doesn't have the swatch yet. But here's gray primer that also doesn't have a swatch. All right, we're gonna swatch the gray real quick so we can compare. Now these aren't the same value. Value is how dark or light something is. And it can be hard for us to judge. I I need just a little bit of brush on sealer. Value can make it hard for us to judge a color. So there are colors that we think, like we think red is fairly light in value because it's so bright, and it's actually pretty dark. Like if you look at red in black and white, you will find that it is probably much darker than you thought it was. But getting values right with the, for the shading and the highlighting and stuff like that, is often more important than picking a color. So these are not the same value gray, but if you look at them together, so this is like what I would call a neutral gray. It's like real white and real black mixed together without really any other color in it. And when you put it up next to this one, this starts looking dirty or warm or brown or however you want to put it. There's clearly something else in there. There's a little brown. This is not very natural. So if you look at like a white dog or a black cat or anything else in nature that's like white or black, they're very rarely true white or black the way you would see, these paint colors or something manufactured. They're usually a little warm. Sometimes they can be a little cool. So since I'm painting a natural animal, I guess it's an natural animal, I want to convey that idea by having a little bit of color in my gray. There certainly are, like that's a warm gray that I picked. I'm not going this dark, at least not yet, on the owlbear, so I haven't used that straight up. It would work straight up, but there are lighter colors, I think, that are warmer browns in the Reaper paint set, but I don't know if there's like an actual triad. The stone triad would be, I do default to just using that a lot. Since it has that little bit of brown, it's nice for stone or fur or, other things like that are natural. So that if I was going to use a triad, that one would work. But I wouldn't, just as I'm not going down this far, the stone shadow or whatever it's called. I can't remember what the shadow color in that triad is probably too dark for painting something that's this light in color. I find with a lot of triads, you will get the best result if you mix in a little bit of a darker color and go deeper in the shadows, and or mix in a bit of a lighter color and go lighter in the highlights. Like the triad system isn't, scientifically rigorous. This is exactly the same value jump from every shadow to every midtone and every midtone to every highlight. Some of them, there's a bigger jump. You're gonna have to mix something in between. Some of them, it doesn't go dark enough. It doesn't go light enough. The triads are really useful, but if you start kind of thinking about that value thing and the shadows and everything, that will help you see. So I'm gonna grab a thing just so you can see. I've got palette cam now, but there can be glare and stuff. So this is actually not even pure white. If I put this on the paper now, you can kind of see there's a little bit of a yellowy color to that white because I'm sort of modeling this initial step on a polar bear. So the concept of the owlbear is that it's part snowy owl and part polar bear. So that's the color I'm starting with, because I will eventually come in and add, pure white. And then this is my first level of shadows, which I put it over here. It looks really dark. You look at it over here, it looks really light. So value is very affected by kind of what's around. Well, all parts of color are genuinely. And that looks super dark. But this is the actual, gray that I started with. And that's even darker. So a lot of times you can make some decisions on the palette, but when you start putting things on the miniature, it might look one way. And then when you start putting something else on the miniature, this is not going to be a great example of that because he's pretty much this. And then the eyes and the feet. But, let's say this figure, after I did, this was originally on white. After I did the skin, that looked dark, but then I start putting these dark browns on, then the skin starts looking lighter again. So color is always relative to what's around it, and that can throw you off. So that's one of the reasons that triads are like nice for convenience, and they're nice when you're starting out and you're not very comfortable picking colors, but they're not kind of like the last word on is this the right color to shade that with. Especially if, if I was using a triad, I would be using the highlight essentially because I'm going very light. It's a snowy polar owl bear, as it were. But yes, I'm sketching in the areas of dark and light, and I'm using a gray that has a bit of brown in it. It looks like it has more brown in it even than it does because, again, of all the relative. There's nothing else that's colorful on here, so it's not toning it down. And all of those things are why if you make some color choices and you start putting on the figure and they're not great, like, it's tougher than it looks sometimes. Like, so don't beat yourself up. You just correct. You just course correct. You just go, oh, that's not working. Let me try this instead. Let me see if I can fix it with this. And that is one of the themes of the show is I try to do stuff and make stuff up, and I'm okay with screwing up because then you get to watch me try to figure out what I did wrong and fix it. So far, I am not unhappy with my choices. We might find out that I went too dark for something that's supposed to be light. That is very often a mistake that I make. But I think it's important to make sure I do get some of the, the shadow tells us what shapes things are. And this is very important in miniatures. I mean, this guy's not so small because let's get some 4 scale to compare an average human miniature. So this is larger than an average human miniature. So it's a bit bigger, and actual light has more of an effect on it than a small miniature. But especially with something like this, because we often think about, oh, I'm going to do a wash or whatever to bring out those fur textures, and that's great. But the texture and the shape are 2 separate things. And you kind of, ideally, want to think about both. You don't necessarily have to focus on both. There might be a miniature where, the accenting the texture is more important to you, and others where accenting the shapes are more important to you. But to at least think about both of those things being a factor. So that's why I didn't just go in with a light color and do a wash. I may still do a wash. I intended to do a wash. But I wanted to start this way so that I don't forget, hey, part of my job are these shapes. So in terms of wet blending, so that doesn't look very smooth. So I can just kind of, push it together with my brush. Is one way of fixing wet blending, and one that tends to work on these highly textured surfaces. So now my problem might be that I have lost a lot of that shadow color. I mean, it's not too dire, but let's say I felt like I'd lost too much. I can just go get more of that shadow color. Everything's still wet here. As long as everything is wet, you can still fiddle. Once something starts becoming tacky, like I wouldn't, even though there's still some shine here, it's like there's part wet paint and part dry paint. Touching here would be a bad plan. I'm likely to lift paint and add texture and make things yucky. But then over here, it's dried. So if I'm like, oh, well, I need kind of that middle color here, that's okay. I can come in now because it's dry. And even you can do a second pass if you need to on things. So these colors are fairly opaque because of the white in them. But a lot of colors, you're going to try to do wet blending like this, and you're not going to cover. You're going to be able to see your primer regardless of whether it's white or black or gray or whatever. Or the surface of the plastic, because I do paint directly on bones and bones black. So you like the first pass is really just getting some paint on there. You might even just do like one color base coat if you wanted, but you can start from the beginning, kind of working in some of your lighter and darker colors. But you got to do it twice usually. You see, I have a fairly big brush. This is actually a 4 because Reaper doesn't even make brushes this big, so I had to break out one of my brushes made by somebody else. Actually, I quite like these brushes, Ebony Splendor. I'm not sure if they're a Jerry's exclusive or not. Jerry's Art Aroma. I got them at my local art store, but I've certainly seen them online as well. But I will compare with this is a Reaper 2, and this is my 4 that's getting a little beat up. But a bigger brush helps for wet blending because you want to get that paint on there quick and mush the edges together as quick as you can because, you know, it does start drying eventually. Well, eventually. It's acrylic paint. It starts drying fairly quickly, even though in this case it's going to torment us with slow drying because I find that the speed of acrylic paint drying is heavily dependent on how fast you want it to dry. In this case, I want it to dry faster so that you're not sitting here literally watching paint dry, so it's not going to dry faster. Especially at conventions, I find this is true, that whatever you want to have happen, the paint's going to go the other way. So this would be getting more light because it's like a tail sticking out, so that's getting a lot of that lighter color. Come down the sides. And I do need to make sure that I cover everything on here. Because if I do want to do a wash, that you can't do directly on the Bones Black or Bones Classic. If you have much water in your paint, it will beat up and run off. So I need to make sure that I get everything covered if I want to do a wash. Which I may have to think about. Maybe I'll have done enough this way. But there are all these pretty textures. I do want to make sure that I accentuate the textures. So painting gray on gray always adds a little extra challenge in the making sure that I got paint on everything section. I once airbrush primed something the exact same color. It was the exact same color gray that I was painting a lot of it. It's like, well, that really makes this tough. But okay. For taking like pictures and stuff. To show what I was doing. And that might be too dark. Because these are areas that are closer to the light. So I probably should have lightened up a little bit there. But I can take it back later if I need to. Something I do often painting white is take it back later. He does need some shadow under these awesome eyebrows. I have not yet decided what I want to do with these little skin flaps. When Michael Proctor painted the official one, I believe he painted them skin. And this is a demonstration of one of the problems. So the first problem I had with, you know, I picked a miniature and source material and they don't 100% match. So the first problem I had is that the source material was a little more feathery than this interpretation of an owlbear. So I have to figure out what I'm doing with the gray stripes. And my answer for that is I'm going to follow the shapes of the limbs in the same way and just make it more like tabby stripes instead of, you know, since I can't do it at the end of feathers, which is what the snowy owl really has, is the dark color is a little semicircle on the edge of some of the feathers. It's gonna, in essence, be kind of more like tabby stripes. So I resolved that issue. But then the next issue I have is that my source material, owlbear, doesn't have a flap of skin. So I have to make some decisions there. as well. And you'll find you run into situations like that using movies for inspirations, using book descriptions for inspiration, using real animals, like I looked up the real animal photos. So you just kind of have to figure out ways to adapt what you're doing. So Hunger Fan says, not much painting happening here in the last almost 3 years. How many learn to paint kits have I missed? So no you haven't missed any true learn to paint kits. What you've missed are, what do they call them? Hold on, I have one here. The learn to paint quick paint. So there are instructions here, but it doesn't explain how to do dry brushing and washing and whatever. So in every one of these, there'll be an example that I paint with layering and one that I paint with dry brushing. In this case, I think he was the layering, she was the dry brushing. So there's the zombies, there's goblins, there's kobolds, and then there's a smaller pack that is a wraith and some gravestones. So the big packs have 8 colors, 1 brush, and then this had 4 zombies. I think the kobolds you get 4 or 6, and then the goblins you get 4 or 6, I believe, as well. But then the wraith is 1 wraith. He's on a gravestone, but then there's like 3 additional gravestones that come on another sprue, and there are, I want to say 5 paints in that one, and still a brush. So that one's good. If you have someone that you kind of want to teach painting and you're going to sit down with them and explain some of this stuff, that would be another option compared to the Core Skills kit. So yes, also in that case, I said every one of them has a layering and a dry brushing example, and that doesn't because there's only 1 figure, so it's just dry brushing. And I want to do, now that I have this new camera set up, I did the zombies on several streams, and those are archived. Let's say archived is a better word than catalog, because they aren't cataloged. There's no specifics in the title or the descriptions to know which things they were, and I no longer remember, although I do kind of mark it down somewhere, but I think my count is off. But there are like 2 or 3 shows where I went through doing the zombies following the instructions. And I'd like to do the same thing with the wraith at some point. But I hadn't done the goblins or the kobolds because this is the camera I was using previously, and I didn't feel like it showed enough detail, well enough to do the smaller things. So this is my second week experimenting with a different camera setup that I think shows things in a little more detail. Oh, and there was it for Christmas, and this is not available anymore, but you can get the miniature still. And then there's like an episode where I did this. There was a how to paint your Krampus. So you got a Krampus miniature, a couple colors of paint that are pretty basic and you probably already have. I think it was like black, ultramarine blue, and oiled leather, which I probably put in one of the kits because I like that color. I can't remember right now if I did or not. So you only need like 4 colors to paint it, and I did that one on stream too. So the Krampus is still available, and all the paint colors that I used are still available. It's just the little instructions. The little instruction sheet is not available, but if you find the old show archives, that's kind of like having the instruction sheet. But I don't always do kit related things here. Sometimes we do testing, sometimes I'm painting something again. So I'll paint things for Reaper's web store, like I painted the February miniature of the month, and then I did like more of a tabletop version on stream. I did that with the Halloween miniature as well. I've done tests of different kinds of brushes for dry brushing and different color washes. I took the skeletons from the original Learn to Paint kit and did different color washes on them, and then on another show I did different color washes on the grass on their bases, so I painted it all the same green, but then did like red, purple, dark green, just seeing, you know, what's you can mix things up a lot with your washes and stuff. Looks like my shadow color is drying out, but I'm gonna give him a minute to dry and work on swatching. And then I guess that's the other thing you missed is expansion sets came out for the Learn to Paint kits. So they're more for, I think, the benefit of people who you want to buy a Learn to Paint kit, and I didn't design I designed the kits for the purpose of the instructions, not for here's a complete set of paints. Now paint this thing with it. So neither of the two kits is a complete set of paints. So if you bought the first set, you don't have a skin color, you don't have a red. We made these expansion sets to, if you want to buy Core Skills, you can buy expansion set number 1, and it gives you some of those colors that you're missing so that you have more of a complete set of paint. And then if you buy Layer Up, the expansion set for that, I think there's no green in there. Something else is missing. And then none of them had purple. And of course that was a terrible oversight on my part, because purple is awesome. So I think there's a purple in each of the expansion sets. What these are the paints from the expansion sets, and I have done this swatch thing on all the paints from the first 2 Learn to Paint kits, and I have kind of a set that I keep for the show. So if people ask me questions or I don't have a specific color set that I'm working with, I use the paints from the Learn to Paint kit. But I added the expansion paints, and I never did my little swatch thing. So while the owlbear is drying, I can show the little swatch thing. There are several episodes in the archives on swatching and why it's useful. And if you were watching when I was kind of comparing the different browns, or the, you know, how this gray looks so much warmer next to this gray, that's the value of swatches. You know exactly what the paint color in the bottle is. And there's ways to do it other than this. I mean, most people actually do it on paper or something like that. You can have like a ring binder or something. Or I originally started doing it on like, they make like plastic fingernails so that nail salons can kind of do the same thing with their nail polish samples, so that you can just show somebody all the samples and say, okay, what color do you want? And I thought that would be a cool way to swatch my paint, and I started doing that, and I got through about 50 of them. And then this occurred to me, and I'm like, this is just going to work for me better. I can go to my shelf and I can see exactly what a color is, instead of having to grab some things and do tests and whatever. What this is off in the corner is brush on sealer. Since I'm applying this on a label, it's not exactly like magazine paper, like it's not that shiny, but it is a little slick, and if I thin the paint down with water, it probably won't stick. This is just the clear part of paint binder, essentially, with extra matting agent in it to make it more matte. So I kind of just, if I thin it with that, I can get that same effect as if I thinned it with water. And the reason I do that is because it lets you see the undertone. So if you get a dark color, there's blue liner. Oops. The downside of my new camera setup. So here's blue liner, which if you look at just the square, like if this was all the information you had, or even just looking at the bottom of the bottle, it looks pretty close to black. But if I thin that out a little so that the white of the paper shows through, you can see that the blue is in there. And you can also see how much blue, because then you get another color like, well, I haven't done the void blue yet, but let's jump ahead to the void blue. Which I question whether oh no, okay. It looked like it wasn't mixed enough. So this is another color that it looks really dark. I mean, it doesn't look black out of the bottle, but it looks pretty dark. and you really get a feel for just how blue it is, because it's very blue. And you can see that much better if you thin it down. Which you can do on paper, too. I do paper swatches on the show all the time. I don't know if I have an example, one that I've done, because I started taking them, putting them away. But these are one where I test on paper all the time, too. So I was testing these two blues that are in the Learn to Paint kits. Overall set. Rathmore TV. Swatching is also useful for helping tell time. Do they still have swatches? Oh, Hunger Fan, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed the 2 Learn to Paint kits and you found them so helpful, because I really appreciate hearing that. Alice and I talked about getting back into it. She has not touched a brush since 2020 when she took a class online with Tish. She's 13 as of January. Last time we saw everyone at ReaperCon was back when she was 9. Are you planning on coming this year? I think the hotels already went on sale. But there's the surrounding hotels too, so hopefully there's something else. There are still swatch stores in Switzerland. We tried the top of the lid technique, but some started chipping off. Only did it because of the case I had it back then. Helped see the paints when opened. Yeah, my problem with the top of the lid thing is it's just too small. So it can help in some contexts, but even at this point, I would probably use that brush on sealer stuff and paint the whole lid, just so that I had more information. Like I could do the lighter here. I mean, it doesn't matter if I mess up my own paints, I guess. But now I can't use this paint for the rest of the session because I'm going to put it in the... So if I thin this down with the stuff, I can kind of see, what it looks like thinned out. Let's get more stuff. And what it would look like as a wash even. So when I have stuff like washes, this is what I will do instead. Or you want to get a 3D thing. Like, so ReaperCon last year, they had the super washes, which I happen to have because I might use one of these as the wash on my owlbear. And I ended up swatching those on... Where are they? Because I actually do need to know this. Well, first I did some tests, and so I did basic swatches on the back of these dogs because they're textury. But then I ended up getting orcs. So this is half strength, and this is what I need to know because this is the color I think that I'm thinking of using. So this would be if I did the wash full strength. Doing that over white would cover up a lot of the white. So I do probably want to thin down my wash if I use the super wash. Certainly if I use anything else, I'm going to want to thin it down. And test it. I always believe in testing washes. And glazes. I'm probably going to need a new pool of stuff because I got too much gunk in that pool. But let's check on the owlbear. See if I can see any shiny. There's just a little bit of shiny left, so I might be able to start working on him again. Oops. Now I'm making noise as well as shaking things. Gel Tip asks, what is the difference between the super washes versus the liners? The liner paint has a little more flow improver in it than the average Reaper paint, so that it flows better. I mean, all of Reaper's paints, I think, are like pigment paints, where I think some of the one-coat paints that are out are more dyes. Honestly, if it's proprietary, so it's like I know a lot about how Reaper paint is made, but do I know what exact base they use for this versus the liners? No, I do not. Or do I know what got put in things? You could ask Anne that. I don't know if she knows what's in these, because these were developed after she left, but she would know more about the liners. So the point of the liners is that they're dark, they thin down well, and they have a little more flow improver in them, because the point is to be able to do lining. And flow improver reduces surface tension and helps it feel like the paint is coming off the brush more smoothly. So if you're in a position where you ever feel like your paint's kind of sticky, like you're trying to paint an eye or something else detail, and it's like you just can't, it just feels like either no paint is coming off the brush or you have to press hard and then too much paint comes off and you've covered over your detail area or whatever, that's when you want to add some flow improver, which I have somewhere over here. So that's this one, 106, 9106. So it's nice to have to add yourself. The liners, there's some in every Reaper paint, but there's a little extra in the liners because that is their purpose, is to do fiddly detail things. And they tend to be intense color, but it's not super opaque. I use the liners to mix shadows a lot of the time. I like them for that. I certainly appreciate them as for lining. So I've been testing this paint in hopes of doing a video. I can't find the black, but just assume there's a black. And one of the things I don't like about it is I couldn't do lining. I couldn't get something dark enough that also would make a fine line. It was super frustrating. And I got out blue liner to compare it. And it was like, okay, this is just so much better. This is so much better than dealing with that. All right, so now I'm gonna look for places that I missed or places where I goofed up what the value should be. Like the chubby little cheek here probably should be a little lighter in color. I think there is some paint missing in some of the crevices here. Painting gray on gray is definitely not the smartest move I've made today, but that's okay. I'm not going to go too nuts with this because I probably will do that wash. This just, I'm seeing a lot of the underlying gray, so I think that part just needs more of the, like a thicker coat of paint, which sometimes you have to do 2 coats or more to build up. I like to say what I want is a good sturdy paint film, so that if I am dry brushing and scrubbing a brush over it, or handling it in play or whatever thing, the paint can take it because there's enough paint there to adhere to the material. This is another spot where I feel like I'm seeing the gray. Well, there I'm definitely seeing the gray of the underlying thing because I never painted there. So we definitely need to get some of this. And this is not pure white. I haven't gotten out the pure white yet. It is bleached linen. It would not have been a big difference if I had used pure white, but I'm hoping that this will, if I do some dry brushing or damp brushing or whatever with pure white later, it will give it a little more punch, especially here on the face. When I looked at both the owl bear from the movie and the actual snowy owls, they don't really have the markings on the face. So the face is pretty white, and that's nice because it'll contrast with the eyes are rimmed in black, and then they're in the real creature, they're very bright yellow. So that is handy, but also something I would probably have exaggerated if they weren't that way in the real creature, because sometimes you gotta exaggerate your reference a little to make it punchy enough for the tabletop. Alright, just see if I can spot any other places. There's still some paint drying. There's like where the wing attached, and I probably glued this together. This is from Bones 4. I think I glued it together. So that's on me. There's a bit of a gap, and enough paint could pool in there that it's taking a minute to dry. But if I work on outer surfaces, I'll give it some time. Just checking if I missed anything. Hunger Fan. Alice wants to go, but I told her only if we pick it back up and start painting regularly again. You don't live too far, actually, do you? I hope that she will, and I hope that she'll both come out and see us. But I certainly understand, you know, it's like a pet. You gotta make sure you're committed before you do anything extreme. So it's a little patchy, but since I am going to do a wash, I don't think I'm going to worry about that too much. Just have some areas where we'll get a little more white in. Or the lighter color shading. This section, it's like I only did the top of the leg on one side of the leg, so I had to fix that. I'm going to bring in a little of this over here for a similar reason. It's just too undistinguished a section. That's probably fur and or feathers. I mean, we got both going on, but both need to have shadows and highlights. I'm pretty sure that that shadow color has completely dried up, so I'm going to mix some more. I probably should have a little more water in my wet palette. I don't like to make it too wet when I'm doing the streams, so that, well, I used to move it around a lot. I guess now I don't have to worry about it as much. I could put a little more water in the palette. Put more water in the paint. I think this one is drying up. We've gotten rid of a lot of duplicate paints and many minis, sold probably $400 worth to my niece for like $100 so she could get into it and practice. And I still have more than we will ever paint. That is the only reason I'm afraid to get back into it. I always lose my will saving throws. Well, I mean, if you're getting back into it, aren't you painting the things you already have? That's where you'd be starting, right? So that would be good. Does your niece live close enough that you can paint with her? Is that something that she and Alice would enjoy? Because that also can make it more fun. That might be why she isn't as excited to do it as she is at ReaperCon, because you get to hang out with people and whatnot. That definitely can make it a little more entertaining to paint. Which I think is, you know, you can certainly do via Zoom and stuff. Like when the shutdown was happening, I had some friends and we did that for a little while. I mean, I'm kind of used to being alone now. I like to listen to audiobooks a lot while I'm painting. So I get caught up on some. I mean, it's a particular show you have to look for that you can like watch, but you don't have to like watch. So you can follow a lot of what's happening just listening. I can tell you that The Mandalorian is not that show, because not even when this new season came out, when the previous new season came out, I was like, oh, I'll catch up while painting, and it's like, now that I'm here trying to do this, there is a lot of not talking, a lot of showing, not telling in this TV show, which is great narratively, but does not make it a very good painting, watch while painting show. I'm seeing some of that underlying gray on the tail, which will probably, you know, since I'm going to try and do those ends of the feather things in at least a few places that have feathers, the tail being an excellent one. I want to make sure that I do have a sturdy paint film there. Give a little more paint. And then I will do a few more swatches while that dries. actually, is that does look like my paint, I think. But it looks weirdly dark, so I'm actually going to lighten it up just a little there. And lighten up his bird butt. Oh, there's the other feathers. And maybe those need to be just a little lighter too. Especially before the wash. All right, back to swatching. Although now I've lost my little plastic thing I was swatching on. Yes, I believe that's it. And I let it go sideways, so now it's all gunked up, but that's fine. Yeah, I watch stuff a lot while I work on laptop while sitting on the couch. Then I go, what did I miss during an episode? The thing that works about painting for watching or listening for me is that if I've decided on my colors and if I'm not doing something where I have to make a lot of decisions, the part of my brain that is hearing stuff and the part of my brain that are painting are not the same parts. So it works out for me that, in fact, it keeps the part of my brain that's going to get bored and say we should go do something else now occupied if I'm listening to something. But if I have to make decisions, if I have to really, sit and think about my colors or make choices, I turn off whatever I'm doing. So I'm fully engaged in the painting side of things, make the choices and whatnot, and then, go back to listening. Or if I'm like trying a new technique, something I haven't done before, I don't listen to stuff then because I have to focus. And I've done that before where I have listened to stuff and then I'm like, oh, why didn't this turn out very well? And it's like because I wasn't really paying attention. I just fell into autopilot, which is really easy to do, and painted the way I always paint instead of trying to do what I was trying to do from this video or whatever that I'm following. So this I don't even really need to add anything to because it's such a transparent color that as long as it's a thin amount of paint on the brush, it'll do the thing. Often I'm watching something I've already watched too, so if I miss a little bit, it doesn't matter. This is not true of audiobooks. I don't think I've ever gone back and listened to another audiobook. I have so many that I haven't listened to yet that I just haven't been rereading, as it were. I used to do it a lot with books, but I was young and I read faster and I got more done. And since I'm not that person anymore, I tend to wait for series to finish and then I will. So I don't know if you can see how there's just a little, get something white, a little bit of darker blue there. I think the resolution might be good enough to see it. So that was a clue to me that this paint, even though I shook it and I shook it on my vortex mixer, there is some binder paint separation. It's probably, so it's probably just, there was a little bit of binder kind of pooled in the tip. And if I do it again, I get straight up paint. But when I have that happen, I usually pull off the tip like you saw me do to check that a whole bunch of paint isn't gucked in there, because that can happen. It can happen a lot. And I've started doing that instead of just relying on paint maintenance, my periodic paint maintenance routine, which is still important. I still do the paint maintenance routine because there are going to be colors that I don't use a lot. In fact, there's a surprising number of colors that I end up not using, even though I like having all the paints. Tyler Hansen, maybe I missed it, but did Reaper ever ask you to paint the newest Rocky holding a brush? They did not. I've been tempted to paint him anyway. I would probably not want to paint him the same as the other Rockies, though, because that was a lot of Red Dragon. What I really love is if Rocky gets a friend. We get Bertha the Blue or Gerda the Green or something. And we have more and more adorable baby dragons. That is what I really want. That is my perfect universe. Maybe I should paint him on the show. I had prepped a couple of the regular Rockies, but I think I have the brush holding Rocky somewhere. And maybe I could be nice to Ron and paint him the same color. I don't know. Those ones I started with the airbrush, which I don't think I could airbrush on show even with the new setup. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, my new setup makes airbrushing interesting prospect because I need to make sure I don't get paint on this monitor that I'm staring at. Oops, apologies. We clearly did not go get the sturdier phone holder thing yet, but hopefully soon. Because I have thought that it ended up that because of the way the scales are, the airbrush part of the Rockies wasn't like a huge part of, it was some of the basic shading, but I ended up doing an awful lot with the brush, the regular brush. I mean, I'm no airbrush expert either. So where's that other blue that I had? So if you're just looking at like the big swatches, I mean, they're different, but you really see how different they are once you thin it out, that this is a much duller color than this one. Which would make a difference if I was trying to mix a wash or a shadow color. That super intense blue is going to work for some things, and then there's going to be other things that it does not work for. Well, that's newish to some of us, Hunger Fan. We don't all sense the passing of time as quickly. But yes, it's the Rocky that was in the Kickstarter, the newest the original Rocky of 5 poses was also in Kickstarter, but that was a while ago. And they had the brush guy, like Gene had sculpted the brush guy then. He just didn't get included in the original set. And then those of us who knew of his existence pestered Ron and said, he's super cool, and I'm pretty sure people would love having a little personal brush holder. So I'm very happy that he did eventually. The ones I painted, this was long enough ago, the first set, that the 3D printing hadn't come around as much as it had. So those were actually like resin master casts that Reaper had done by, I forget the name of the people who do their resins off the top of my head. They do very good work. But I think all of them pretty much had something break in transport. So there's glued on wings, and I mean, the nice thing about resin, there's more of that, the binder separation thing. The nice thing about resin's breaking, and this is true of 3D prints as well, is it's usually a nice clean break, and you can often glue it back together, even if it's like a painted thing, and not even see where the crack is. But it's still somewhat heart attack inducing. I mean, not if they come to me broken, then I don't have a heart attack, because that wasn't my fault. It was their little wings, because normally something chunky like that doesn't break. I had resin for the Fire, the Freedy, Ziba, and the, Fire Ifriti, and also the Storm Giant. And, those are nice, solid pieces, nothing cracked on those. I think those are the only resins I painted where nothing did crack. But I'm going to wait and do the gold later since I don't have any metallic flake happening in my life right now. We'll check on Mr. Owlbear instead. I don't think you missed a new Rocky or a new Kickstarter. All right, so the color that I was thinking of for the wash, which is on these orcs, is Super Wash Bone Shade. But so this is straight out of the bottle, and this is, I want to say, 2-drop sealer to 1-drop stuff. I could be wrong, but I want something more like this than like this, I think. Or I could do a bit of both. I can have 2 sets of washes and put this in the darker areas and this only on the lighter areas. You can mix a wash with other things. I know the super washes are not currently available. If you use this brush-on sealer with other things, you're going to get something kind of similar. It's not going to be exactly like that. In fact, I'm going to use half and half because I want less on the upper surfaces and more in the crevices, like a standard wash instead of kind of the overpaint idea. And then I always keep a little dropper bottle that's just regular water. Well, okay, actually it's distilled water. It's not just regular water. I have very heavy water. Heavy water. It's got a lot of minerals and stuff in it. So I will often just use water straight out of my thing for... It's actually pretty similar to those colors. So it's not, I will thin paints with water out of my thing, but if I'm adding water to a paint because it's thickened up in the bottle, I do always use my distilled water. And then when I add a bunch of calcium and lime and whatnot. Do I want to thin that down just a little, maybe? So just as I add lighter and darker, kind of foundation paints, I'm going to double up the wash. The other way to do this would be to do the light wash, and then after that dries, come back in just in areas where I want it and do that other wash, which would probably be the more sensible way to do it. But let's see if this works. I'm worried the camera's going to pay too much attention to that, so I'm going to get it out of the way. Washes usually dry a little bit lighter than they look when they go on. So I think I got that about right. I'll try a bit of this other one in this deeper crevice. I'm very likely to find that I did not mix enough wash because I forgot that he is an enormous owlbear. And there's just a lot of real estate here. So what I want to do is kind of keep track of the wet edge and keep moving that. So I don't want to go back into where I've already done washing. I mean, I just lied and I did it, but ideally I don't want to do that. Put a little of that darker one there. And I want to try to find a natural stopping point if I do need to stop and do something. This kind of creature has less of a natural stopping point than something like this. But I'm going to call that good since that's a shadow line. And just mix a little more wash before I get too much further along. Well, I can still test it that I got the same color. Gel tip had to do a work thing, but it's back now. Well, hopefully it wasn't too aggravating a work thing. Yeah, I think that's about the same. Kirst hasn't painted in 5 months and barely noticed. Well, you should get back to painting though. Especially if you find it relaxing and it's a nice kind of getaway for you. Then not doing it, you might not notice consciously, but I find that I get kind of irritated more easily if I haven't done much art or miniature painting or something for a while. I may not think that's what the problem is, but it's happened enough that I'm pretty sure that that is part of, I mean, not that that's the only thing that's going to make me irritated, but it happened consistently enough that I'm like, oh, I need to keep in mind that I have to do these things sometimes, or I will be even more sad and pathetic than I already am. I know, I just did the thing I told you not to do and went on a place that had wet paint. You're pretending that you're not seeing me, ignoring my own advice. So that's like a bit of a natural break. I went past the natural break a little bit. Just wash some of it off. And now I need more of the thicker version. Cursed. I've been cleaning my apartment, getting rid of junk, sorting and organizing, got my new desk, and moved the old table to hold some of my model stash. Yeah, I'm still working on the whole decluttering project. I got through a lot of the miniature stuff, but well, okay, the miniature stuff in this room. Did I get through all the miniature stuff? Not by any stretch of the imagination. But there is plenty left to do. So much left to do. Kind of been distracted lately. And here's where we find out that I'm terrible at washes and I missed a bunch of places. And I'm glad that it is a fur creature, so the fact that I'm coming back in over spots should not be too noticeable. But I will go back to trying to follow my own advice and keep the wet edge moving. Paint all of the things. This is all pretty upward facing, so even though there's, like a little bit of shadow there, I'm not adding any of that super dark wash to those spots. Well, dark in context to a white owlbear, I guess would be a fair way to say that. But I will add some of that darker color in there. And on those feathers. So I'll probably want to do more dry brushing or side brushing or however I choose to approach that. I'm going to try and break where the arm attaches here. That's kind of a natural break. And then this side of the face, if I'm looking at him the way the light would be, this whole side of his face is turned down. So I'm going to use the darker color there instead. Because in a way that's going to help bring attention to the other side of the face if that's good and dark. Get this crevice nice and dark as well. This leg, it's a similar thing, that this is the underside of the leg. There's not going to be a lot of light reaching the underside of the leg. This is also a big crevice. But I'm using the lighter color on the upward parsing parts of the leg. And then the foot is like kind of gonna be shadowed a bit from the body, but it's also facing up, so it's not gonna be super, super dark. Let's see. Doing a bit of a mix on these parts. And absolutely, if this approach would make more sense to you to do one wash and then come in and do spot washes with the darker one, that is often the way I would do this. I just, for expedience sake, thought I would try it this way this time, especially since there are all these feathers that are gonna cover up some of my boo-boos. Well, feather and fur texture, both. And do I need to mix yet more of this wash? It certainly appears that I do. For that last alarm. Sometimes it is exciting and sometimes it is depressing, just cleaning up and discovering hobby stuff I forgot I had. Yes, I understand exactly how that feels. I was working on a blog post. I mean, if you follow my blog, you may have noticed there hasn't been much to follow lately. I ended up kind of taking a break. It just seems like writing stuff has been taking forever. But I was writing one about decluttering and how there's actually a lot of what makes it hard isn't, just the tedium of doing it, the tedium of chores and whatnot. There's a lot of emotional stuff because you have to confront that. Like, I bought this thing and I shouldn't have, because I haven't used it and I said I was going to do it. And like, you just sort of get all these thoughts, and it can be because often you'll be like, I don't want to feel bad, so I'm just not going to do this. And that's what'll happen when you have good intentions and you start cleaning stuff up and decluttering, and then it just seems like too much and you don't come back to it. And it's because you're dealing with a lot of those things in your head. So I think it helps to know some of that, to know some of kind of human psychology. And because, if you think about it, it's like the sunk cost fallacy is a big thing. It's like, you already spent that money. It doesn't matter if you didn't use the thing. It doesn't matter if maybe you shouldn't have made that purchase. You already did. So not thinking about it isn't solving anything. It isn't making your life better. Keeping it so that you don't feel bad isn't solving anything, because then you feel bad that you don't have enough space for the stuff you really do want. So it's like, if you kind of aware of some of these things. Or there's another one that we don't think about, is if you own something and you're thinking of selling it, you give it more value than if someone else was trying to sell you that thing. Like, just the fact that you own something makes it valuable to you. There's like this ownership effect. And you have to kind of, be realistic about that. It's like, okay, it's more important that I get this thing out of my house than that I get whatever I think fair market value or whatever is for it. Because first of all, I'm probably wrong. And next of all, I got to get it out of my house so I make space for the things I really do want to enjoy. And there's actually like a whole bunch of things like that I have discovered in my own attempts. Because I definitely get that. Like, I get really upset about, like, okay, why did I buy all this stuff that I haven't used? Like, why am I so dumb? It's like, well, that's not helping. Telling myself that I'm going to paint something that I don't actually like also isn't helping. Like, why am I going to punish myself if I, like, okay, I bought this thing and then my taste changed or whatever. So that's okay. That happens. Just move on. Get it out of here so I can make space for all the cool stuff I do like. All right, so he looks a lot less white now, but we will address that. But you can see all the cool fur and feathers that Jason sculpted much better now as well, because that is the magic of the wash. But we definitely are going to have to bring some of that white back. Will we be doing that today? I don't know. We might not be doing that today, because that's going to take a minute to dry. So perhaps instead, I will finish off. For those who came in later, I've been painting this owlbear as a snowy owl and a polar bear owlbear mix. Partly because I went to see the D&D movie, and I do recommend it. So I thought it'd be fun to paint something from the movie. I'm not mentioning spoilers or anything. I do recommend seeing it. I think it's a good movie. I think it explains everything well enough that if you have friends or family members who are not into D&D, they'll be fine. If you're into D&D, and particularly if you're into the Forgotten Realms, there'll be some stuff that you kind of get as an extra treat. But you do not have to know. You know, they explain anything you need to know to understand the action. There's some swearing. There's not like sex or nudity. And the violence is, I would say the consequences of the violence are fairly abstract. Like you're not seeing gouts of blood everywhere, that kind of thing. But it is, you know, a quippy style D&D, not a dark and serious Lord of the Rings kind of thing. Hunger Fan is asking if it's better than the one with Jeremy Irons. It would have to really be terrible to not be better. I went to the theater for that and experienced. I mean, my friend and I were when we were actually alone in the theater. It was one of those little shoebox theaters. I still lived in Canada and was at Cineplex. And we were like, kind of, all right, we had our hopes up, and this is like so bad. We're gonna have to go with it. It's so bad, it's funny. Because otherwise we're probably going to start crying. So I almost fell off my chair laughing at the Jeremy Irons overacting. Yeah, that was a whole thing. And I've heard that guy that has like the blue lip, that whoever was kind of like, you know, when you do a property like that, there's someone from Dungeons and Dragons licensing that makes sure you're portraying things correctly. And he assumed that was for some kind of CGI thing. Like, and that was just the director wanted to do it that way. And it was like, okay, yeah, the director wanted to do a lot of really dumb things. A lot of really, really dumb things. It is a million times better than that. That doesn't mean it's the best movie ever. I don't know what I think the best movie ever is, but I enjoyed it a lot. I felt it's not going to represent the way everybody plays D&D, because it's such a diverse game that everybody plays it differently. But if you've ever been in a group where there's, you know, some smart assery and stuff, it certainly represents that, all right? And that is the D&D I play, because I'm not super serious. I actually had a few places where I need to do some more super washes on this guy. So let's see. I think that I used this chestnut for his leather, but I built it up a little and did some shading. But this is the back of his leg. Armor, I don't feel like it has to match exactly, which is good, because do I remember what I did? No, not really. Do I remember anything ever? No, not really. But yes, narratively, I would say it makes more sense than the previous D&D movie as well. It's like, you know what's happening. It fits in with kinds of D&D adventures I've had. I didn't remember it from the original movie, but I saw someone else talking about the Jeremy Irons one and pointing out that it wasn't even really a party ensemble thing. There was like a main character guy and stuff that only he could do, which is not really super in the spirit of D&D. You know, as if there weren't enough other ways that they'd gotten that wrong. I thought the CG and everything was fine. Somebody, I posted on Facebook and somebody commented that they had another friend who went who said they thought that some of it looked unfinished and that some of the background people also kind of looked unfinished. And I don't know what he was talking about, but that is, you know, one of those areas where different people have different preferences and stuff, so I can't claim that I am 100% correct. I know when She-Hulk, when they were showing the previews for that, I was one of the people who thought the CGI on that looked a little less than amazing. I think they did fix it some before it aired. And also, I just, you know, I'm like, I can accept that it's a television show. They don't have that kind of budget or time. It's not going to be perfect. If it got to the point where I could live with it, and I was okay with it. But everybody has kind of different standards for that sort of thing, I guess. So I just thought I would mention that that's... But most people that I have seen commenting on it have enjoyed it. I know a bunch of people got to see it. I think both the week, not this weekend, but the previous weekend, there were like Amazon Prime special showings or something. We did not get in through one of those, and we went to see a different movie. We went to see Ant-Man and the Wasp, and we're walking down the hallway, and I'm like, wait a minute, that theater says D&D. Like, what's going on? Why are they watching D&D? And I'm getting stuck going to Ant-Man and the Wasp, which was for my husband's sake. And then later we discovered that it was some kind of Amazon Prime thing, which we are in Amazon Prime. But we don't do whatever it is that you do to hear about that, I guess. I keep not knowing what to do with this part. I keep not wanting to deal with this weapon in general. I wonder if I could cut it out and just pretend that he has an open hand. That seems like something I should probably have decided before I painted anything. What color should this bag be? I'm gonna make like a tan burlap thing. Man, that was back when you were still in the land of the correct spelling of checks. Yes, that was a minute ago. 23 years is my understanding is when that movie came out. And I moved 20 years ago. Gel tip. I had the opportunity to see either Shazam or D&D, and Shazam won out. But it was like I went to a D&D movie, so it was cool. I do want to see the D&D movie, though. Yeah, I would like to. I enjoyed the first Shazam. I hear the second one isn't quite as good. If you have an opinion, I would be happy to hear that. But I think that I would probably still enjoy it. Gel tip. I'm starting to get back into the RPG rather than wargaming. Well, you'll certainly feel in the mood for some adventuring if you watch that movie, I think. Hunger Fan. Sounds like you had a tougher decision than back when I decided on going to see Joe Dirt or Freddy Got Fingered. We chose poorly, and I don't need to tell you which one we saw. And Curse said, clearly you did not see Joe Dirt. Grey Mouser. It couldn't have been as bad as the original D&D movie. Me and my partner greatly enjoyed John Wick Chapter 4. Conversion time. Turn it into corn on the cob. That would be like some dire corn. But we know there's dire cabbage, so somewhere there's some kind of dire farm. And maybe they do also have dire corn. Again, the kind of thing I should think about before I fully paint a miniature. I'm trying to sort of make tan. Alas, there is not a tan color in the super washes. So I'm just trying to get a more different brown, I guess, really, is what I'm trying to do. I'm going to call that a more different brown. You can never have enough brown. is one of my mottos in life. For paints, I mean. Not for like all clothing and color considerations. Although then it looks kind of like his skin, doesn't it? And that's a weird choice. He shouldn't really be... I guess it could be a bag made out of the skin of his ogre enemies. I'll shift it just a little bit more orange. And now I see one of these rope things that I forgot to paint white when I was correcting all of my goof ups. I do think that we should have some like watch parties of the original D&D with people kind of doing the MST3K thing, because it is eminently mockable. Eminently mockable. So much mocking should be done of that movie. And up here, do the leather wash. Grey Mouser, we did go one time to see Pearl Harbor opening night as a large group, thinking it would be a great historical movie. Well, that one, there was no reason to believe that it wouldn't be a great movie, which I don't think I've ever actually seen it, but it wasn't my type of movie. And then nothing anyone said later convinced me that I should make it my type of movie. But yes, I keep forgetting that this guy really isn't so close to done unless I do deal with that weapon or bite the bullet and cut it off. I mean, I guess if I mess up his hand, we can just give him some kind of scars or something. Because overall, I'm happy with him. I just really don't feel like painting. What the effort that it would require to paint the metallics on that are not. Strongly drawing me to do it, but maybe I could kind of dry brush my way into that. I don't know. Well, and I haven't painted the shield thing. I'm way less done than I thought I was. Dang it. I liked it better when I thought it was done. Because he turned out cool enough, I feel like he should be finished. Now I'm throwing owlbears around. That's kind of rude of me, I think. So this is the other day, I said something about how I like to use these one coat paints, and instead of pre-shading, I like to kind of approach it watercolor style, where I start pretty light and then shade down. So that's kind of what, I mean, I use some kind of yellow in there too, apparently. Here, we can do that here too. Faking it. So then it will have to dry a sec. I'll come back over here. So watercolor would be, you kind of start with the lightest color, and then you work down, you work in your shadows. And that is like how I like using what, for lack of a better name, I've been calling one coat paints. I believe there's like a universal name for these. And since this style of painting, you know, predates contrast paints, I'm not sure that calling it contrast style paints is fair, because people used to do this with just washy style regular paints. I have instructions in an old set of miniatures my husband bought for doing it. I remember there was someone on the Reaper forums who used to paint that way. Frogmeister? Frog? I mean, everybody called him Froggy, but I think his actual name was like Frogmeister or something. I mean, actual name on the forums, obviously not actual name as a human being. And if I have places where I put too much, I can just kind of wipe it a little. It's still wet. Did the legs dry? I think they did. So it'll make a little more sense when I talk about just adding the shadows. I actually almost went too dark on his other armor, and this should be more like that, but since it's on the back, I'm not going to stress about them. It's not going to draw focus. But yeah, I probably need to get some of the black or regular black to really get that dark, but that's kind of, might just call that good for now, since I do want to be finished painting this guy. Greymouse Pearl Harbor is not so much about history as it is about love affairs. Oh, no one ever convinced me it was a romantic movie either, so I don't think I'm going to run out to see that one. Let's check on, this is where the owlbear is for today, and I will return to him next week when hopefully some of you have gone out and seen the movie, and you can tell me what you think. I think I've seen places where I missed the wash again. Or, I mean, sometimes there's just the shapes, you can't get the wash to stay exactly where you want it because of gravity and all that good stuff. And that is what it is, but I'm just going to check that it's not more me spacing out than gravity. Because I'm super bad at getting washes everywhere they should be. Just consistently, regularly bad. And yet I don't really do that with glazes. Weird. So that's where he is now. He does not really look like a snowy owl or a polar bear yet, but we will bring back a lot of that lighter color. now that we have kind of defined both the overall shapes, you know, where he's got like his bicep and pecs and those kinds of shapes, and then also the textures of the fur and the feathers. And I will ponder what to do with these skin flaps that are not on my inspiration owlbear or reference photos. Yeah, if you weren't here at the beginning, if you go back and watch the VOD, you will see I go through some photos of polar bears and snowy owls that I used kind of for inspiration in deciding how to paint this guy. And I talked a little more about, you know, the decisions and the kind of, there's always a bit of a struggle when you're trying to follow a source thing, be it the movie or the photos that I picked out, and your thing wasn't made to be exactly like that thing, which is why I have these skin flaps that are not in my source inspiration. But that is fine. I'll figure out something. Painting them skin-like probably will be the creepier answer, but I don't want them to draw too much attention. But he should have some really nice contrast going on, because the beak will be, you know, black, and then the eyes are, we looked at the real snow bears, the real snow owls, and their eyes are very yellow with the black rim, so it is very eye-catching. So we'll have like value contrast up here and saturation contrast. And then, you know, if I paint the inside of the mouth redder than this skin, that should also keep the saturation and the focus up here on his very cranky face where it should be. So thank you for joining me. I hope that made sense and gave you an opportunity to look at some wet blending and some washes and whatnot. Sorry, now I'm seeing more places where I goofed up or the gravity was working against me. It's always the way. And I hope you go see the movie and that you like really enjoy it, especially if you have had to suffer through the other one, where admittedly watching Jeremy Irons act that bad is worth seeing in a sense. But it certainly is not a representation of D&D as most of us enjoy it. Gravity has made victims of us all. That's true. My spine definitely feels victimized by gravity. I think we should all get free traction. It feels so good. All right, so I'm guessing that Quindy will find us someone to hang out with. My guess would be that it's going to be Art of Mike Disney, but one never knows what Quindy's going to do other than be, you know, super reliably helpful. We always know that Quindy's going to do that. We could not do this without Quindy. I couldn't. I don't know about the other people, but I certainly could not do this without Quindy. Because here she is with some links that I never would know how to do. You're very welcome, Night Whisper. I guess I'll go back to my poorly set up face cam. Maybe I'll figure this. We're probably gonna try to figure out a more from above light, but my guess would be that there's always gonna be. This is a pretty ideal place for the camera in terms of kind of seeing it from my point of view. So then you see what I see while I'm painting, which I figure is handy. But I guess we'll find out if my husband and I can cook up anything better. So, oh, yep, Quindy's got the ray going, and it is Art of Mike Disney. Say hi, spread the reaper love, and I'll see you next week.